afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to another HROToday educational podcast. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HROToday. We publish HROToday Magazine, HROToday EMEA, HROToday APAC, and host the HROToday events held around the world, as well as manage the HROToday Association. Today, we're going to talk about HR technology, and this is the first of a two-part series, and we're going to have the same guest in both. We're going to talk about technology, truth or dare. And really, the issues with technology are really at the forefront of the media, and we have a great guest joining us today. Jill Goldstein is the Global Managing Partner for Talent Transformation with IBM. Jill has been with IBM for about 6 months now, just joined. Prior to that, 17 years in the comparable role as Global Lead for Talent and HR Operations at Accenture. And before that, she was actually an HR practitioner, leading HR for the Spherion company, now part of Randstad. Interestingly enough, she started her career as an accountant. So she's very much into that sort of quantifiable look at HR. HR metrics and technology is critical to that. Jill, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Elliot. I'm flattered that you know so much about my background. That was awesome.
I looked at LinkedIn. I just do that kind of thing before I podcast, Do you want to tell us a little bit about the talent transformation practice at IBM before we launch into the questions?
That'd be great. So my team within IBM works with HR functions, technology organizations, and GPS leads to really rethink the way that their teams show up to deliver services into the workforce and increase their performance and productivity. So that might include things like operating model, service delivery model design, deploying a cloud HCM like Workday SuccessFactors or Oracle, delivering those services in their future state through the BPO organization, and most recently, working with clients to understand how or if to use AI and now generative AI in the way that they engage with their workforce and do their work themselves.
Awesome. So you guys are a little busy every now and then with stuff, I would imagine. Everything in HR right now is in such transformational flux. The last 15 years we have been with the Great Recession, the bust, followed by the boom, followed by the pandemic, followed by the bust, followed by the boom, okay? And now we're sort of in a gradual bust thing supposedly again. So technology is critical to being able to adapt, to being able to measure and project. So this is the first of a two-part podcast series, and the mass media and the HR trade media right now are awash with stories on artificial intelligence and the discussion about what it can do for business, the dangers it represents, and the possibility it will replace throngs of workers. Technology is almost always a conundrum for HR. It's both a blessing and a curse, depending on your perspective. And today we're going to get Jill's. Now, this is the first podcast. This is the dare part of HR Truth or Dare. When we talk about HR Truth or Dare right now with technology, we're going to address the issue of AI. The second part, the truth part, is going to talk about the state of HR technology infrastructure. And, we're talking about flying to the moon, but right now a lot of companies have flat tires in terms of HR integration and, system integration, et cetera. So let's go to the dare part. Jill, are you ready to dare?
I'm ready.
All right. So we've all heard about AI and the issues that it poses for the future of work or the risks to technology that we may not all understand. But the CHROs of major organizations are now in deep conversations with CEOs, CFOs, and CIOs about artificial intelligence. And I want to specify, we're really talking about right now that all the pressures around generative AI. So you have IBM. I'm sure you're asked about it all the time. And you guys are providers of one of the big platforms. You have the IBM Watson platform, similar to ChatGPT or Bard or some of the other ones. IBM Watson's actually been a bit older and is more commercially oriented. So from your perspective of what you do, what questions should HR leaders, such as the ones in our audience, be prepared to answer on AI when their colleagues and the CEOs come to them? And what should the answers be, and what questions should they be prepared to ask their CIOs, et cetera? So it's a complex question. What should they be prepared to answer, and what should they be prepared to ask might have been a simpler way to phrase it.
So actually, it's a really good question, Elliot. The first question that HR is asked is a pretty simple one, and that is, are they currently using AI in any of their current HR processes? And those outside of HR are surprised by the answer. Because we're in the industry, we all know that many of our HR applications and technologies have traditional AI capabilities baked in. Resume parsing, for example, has been around for 15 years. And more recently, through the pandemic, we saw other use cases like sourcing and screening, auto-grading of video interviews, inferencing of skills, which all really took off. And now with generative AI, use cases are exploding. I mean, job description creation and intelligent search are just two examples. Other questions will naturally follow, where stakeholders become interested in the answers to these questions, regardless of whether or not the implication is within HR or outside of HR. How does AI work, and how do we ensure that it's trustworthy, ethical, and compliant? Will AI replace human jobs? How will AI impact our workforce and skill requirements? And what steps can employees take to adapt to AI-driven changes? But as you mentioned, really, it becomes equally as important as to what questions HR should be asking. And so in addition to being asked the question about ethical implications, HR should be at the forefront of answering those questions, but also challenging the rest of the organization around ethical implications of AI and how we ensure that we're protecting data privacy. It should be explainable. We should make sure that AI is ethical, robust, transparent, and private. In addition, HR is going to be asking questions and should be asking questions about how it fits into the broader enterprise digital transformation, and what other functions need to be involved in the decision-making at an enterprise and governance level, as well as what KPIs the organization is putting in place so that as they're deploying AI and measuring, that there's a shared definition of success. So Elliot, we can go a lot of ways with the conversation, but I think fundamentally, those are the questions that I'm being heard going into HR and coming out of HR.
Do you think anyone, not just HR, understands the capabilities of generative AI well enough to answer? We know there's privacy issues. I was on the phone with a bunch of HRDs in Europe and concerns about GDPR and open source licensed products. But do you think we understand enough of what generative AI can do yet? Have we learned enough about it to even register what the impact on the future of work is? Because I feel like sometimes people are trying to project into it. They're trying to personify it and describe it as having an emotion. They talk about you having hallucinations when it's literally just the system can't, interpret the information it's got. Do you think we're at a point where we even know the answers to the questions or the questions we should be asking, or is it too soon? Should we be waiting a year or two to get into this and wait to see how governments regulate it, et cetera, et cetera?
I think that's a really fair challenge, Elliot, as I think about the reality of what we know, and equally as important, all the things we don't know that we don't know today. That said, I think we should start as HR professionals now trying to put our arms around the rest of the enterprise and work towards clarity of intention across the enterprise. That ambiguity right now gives us some time to work at the C-suite level to understand what we as an enterprise mean individually by responsible AI and what we're willing to do and not do. The other thing I would say, Elliot, is that at its most basic functional capability, AI is the next level of maturity around automation. And so we do know at minimum that jobs will continue to be impacted because of the increased capability and ability to automate activities, higher value activities than what we've seen in the past. So jobs will change. Many people have access to generative AI and the insights that it produces in a way that we've never had before. Granted, some jobs will become obsolete, but I do think we're going to be able to see the impacts of generative AI in the short term. Now, what we don't know, which is fair to your question, is where it will all go over the next few years. So I do think that's a fair challenge.
For what it's worth, I think the ethical conundrums, I'm not sure that HR should be tied up with the idea that certain human jobs will go away. How many people are still employed as key punch operators? Those jobs went away in the mid-'80s, right? Technology changes work. It's much ado about what is a pretty natural cycle. Let me pull this out of the theoretical. So we've been talking about theoretical, trying to use the Jill Goldstein crystal ball to peer into the future. Let's go to some real-world scenarios. We've all heard the stories about the potential of AI and the risks, whatever. And there are irresponsible claims by some of the companies about the potential. There are also irrational fears of the potential dangers. But you guys, as I mentioned in the intro, you actually offer one of the big three platforms, which is the IBM Watson product. It's been out there for a while. So in the real world now, in actual use case, how is AI being used by IBM clients? And what are the big successes and the limitations that you see right now of AI as a platform?
Well, I would actually like to start with what we consider at IBM to be client zero, which is our own IBM internal HR function, who has been on a journey and been maturing an AI-driven digital assistant for the last 7 or 8 years. Within IBM, the digital assistant we use is called Ask HR, and it's been really building up capability and currently answers 2,000 inquiries, automates over 100 processes, with always the intention of expanding and expanding and expanding. So recently they've introduced the capability to push nudges out to employees who are getting ready to travel. We get weather alerts periodically. And it's really been that journey that I think for me has created a reality that it can be done in a very thoughtful way that is designed based on the voice of the employee, but really derives and drives a lot of value back to the workforce and the enterprise. So in my mind, that is a real example. It is something that we actually do sell to our clients as part of the Watson platform. So it is a real life example of how I see organizations using it. I will tell you that outside of that, we have seen HR organizations starting to lean a lot more into targeted advisors for very specific use cases like skill inference. Another advisor that seems to be growing in popularity a lot is around promotions, where these AI-driven advisors make recommendations or rank candidates for promotion based on their internal promotion policy, skill, performance, diversity, and tenure as examples. But something that's close to both of our hearts, Elliot, is actually some of the best use cases and examples I've seen have been in talent acquisition, where we're seeing job description creation, auto-grading of video interviews. We've really gotten very sophisticated in talent acquisition. One of the things we work with on our clients is the ability to automatically segment incoming requisitions based on role requirements, local regional talent availability, recruiter success, so that we're matching the right recruiter with the incoming job rec to make sure that we're maximizing success for our clients. So I will say that it is really exciting to see this, but the biggest game changer is actually something that you introduced in your question, Elliot. And that is, rather than a lot of these individual point solutions, we're seeing platforms. So platforms are taking a lot of these niche solutions that are available in the market today and linking them together in algorithms that are producing that single experience that we as HR professionals have been looking for. So I think it's the platform that's the game changer in the way that organizations are using AI and will continue to mature into generative AI.
Now, this Ask HR product that you've got can simulate an HR assistant. Does that include the ability to respond sarcastically? Because that's been mostly my experience, right?
Elliot, if we put you in as what we call a knowledge engineer to teach the machine, I'm pretty sure we would get some pretty lighthearted responses.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So your first line of defense is this essentially chatbot, but your point's well taken. In talent acquisition, while we might not be using generative AI, machine-based learning systems and the ability of them to communicate with multiple platforms, that is not new technology. That is very much ingrained. So what percentage of your clients, just if you blue sky, is it 100% that are using, machine-based learning algorithms and systems as part of their HR infrastructure?
I would say that well over 80% of our clients have some generative AI, but most AI somewhere in their technology blueprint and or service delivery model. And some of it is organic in the service delivery partners that they're choosing, like IBM. Others are part of other point solutions that they may have that supplement their system of record. But I do think that's a fair assessment.
Wow, 80%. All right. So where HR dares, here we are. We are actually pretty advanced as a function in using artificial intelligence. So to our audience, the question of whether we move to the next phase with generative AI and how is still sort of being figured out. So that's it for this podcast, but we'll be back in podcast number 2 to talk about the truth, which is what is the state of HR technology infrastructure? So as we start talking about going to the future, we've got to make sure that we've covered all the potholes in the past as we're on that journey through time. I want to thank Jill Goldstein, who is the Global Managing Partner of IBM's Talent Transformation Practice. Jill, thanks so much for taking part in the podcast.
Thank you for the invitation.
All right, and we will be back at podcast number 2. Thank you very much to the audience for your time and attention, and we'll look forward to you joining us on another HROToday educational podcast.